Napoleon! Everyone's saying it's the dad movie of the 2023 holiday season. That's right, a movie for dads. But here's the problem. The movie is surprisingly risque. Now that might not be an issue for dad himself, but dads often have to go to the movies with the rest of their family. I think it's rare for dads to be able to go by themselves. Sometimes dads can skip a movie, but I think the rest of the family is going to get real suspicious, especially during a holiday weekend, if dad's like, I'm going to step out for a few minutes and go to the movies myself. People are going to be like, what are you seeing? And why can't the rest of us come? Good luck, dads. So now, when I tweeted this, some of you were like, the trailer was risque, Grace, so I don't know why you were surprised. I think the issue is that I didn't expect the number of scenes and therefore the frequency at which the film dipped to that level. Like, it's not Wolf of Wall Street, it's more like The White Lotus season 2. Season 2, not season 1. So again, maybe this wouldn't have been, I think it would have been an issue at any point, but I think it's particularly tough because they released the movie for Thanksgiving weekend, which is a whole stretch of like dads, everyone keeping it, like everyone's just looking at dad, right? And you only have a week to see it or so because Beyonce's coming out the very next weekend and she's taking all the premium screens. So again, this is a real conundrum for dads. They can't really just say peace out to the rest of their family and go to the movies. I think dad's only hope is to somehow, and it has to feel like everyone else's idea, but to maybe be a good way to get dad out of the house for a few hours, if maybe people would like that, right? But you can't suggest that, dads, because again, people will get suspicious. But maybe you can subliminally, or maybe you can get one of your kids to tell mom, wouldn't it be great if dad wasn't here for a few hours while you're doing all, that's the thing. Like, well, mom's doing all the cooking. You're going to go see Napoleon? It's just going to be rough. I'll be curious to hear how you got out of the house to see Napoleon. Now, I'm not a dad, but I have a dad. My dad passed down to me a love of history. And boy, does this movie scratch that itch. And not only does it celebrate history, but with a twist. Because while the battle sequences are highly artistic, they're also very edgy. This was cool. Wait till you hear this. The best way I would describe them is that they have a slight Pirates of the Caribbean feel, but they also reminded me of video games. Oh my goodness, today, so many guys love historical wartime type video games like Call of Duty and even Duty. This is the kind of movie where they would make that joke. We'll get to how silly it is in just a moment. But anyway, also Assassin's Creed, which, goes to different historical periods, right? So it's pretty brilliant to add that element to this film, to broaden its appeal to new generations of history lovers. So back to Pirates of the Caribbean, Joaquin Phoenix is doing a mix here of his Joker performance for sure, and Ridley Scott said it was that performance that inspired him to cast Phoenix as Napoleon. But he's also doing a little bit of Jack Sparrow here. A number of his lines are comedic. My audience and myself were laughing out loud quite a bit at this movie, and intentionally so. The movie wants to be comedic. And Joaquin Phoenix even has some really fantastic physical gags. It's a really compelling, fun performance. And while Phoenix doesn't disappear into the role, he does the opposite, in that he cements himself, I think, as a strong on-screen presence. And if Napoleon can deliver at the box office, even somewhat close to what Joker did, then Phoenix might suddenly, at this stage in his career, find himself becoming a movie star, well, in the right roles, because Beau is Afraid still tanked. But in the right role, which of course is that famous Paul Newman quote, in the right role, he is priceless, well, that might very well be the case with Joaquin Phoenix. In my initial tweet about the film, I also said that it was a soap opera for dudes, because it's trashy, and as I'm saying, it's also very silly. In addition to the intentional comedic aspects, the one thing that is, I don't know what they were thinking, because the accents are all over the place. Almost all of the accents are British, even though we're in France. So at first you're like, oh, is this the British commenting on the situation? And you're like, no, these people are supposed to be French. That's ridiculous. There's one French Algerian actor with a slight French accent doing his best, trying his hardest. And then in the middle of all of it, there's Joaquin Phoenix with an American accent. So you're like, what are you guys doing? It's ridiculous. And I can't believe that this is what they decided to go with. But you know what? It ultimately works. Well, I mean, part of you just has to be like, they're not changing it, so am I going to let that ruin this movie for me? And my answer was no. Some of you might not be able to get past it, but I was. And what helped was the trashy, intentionally funny tone, the strength of Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby's performances, we'll get to her more in a moment, the battle sequences, the incredible production values, the score, which at times is so French, it makes up for the accents. I'm like, is that a harpsichord? I love it. And I'm definitely buying the soundtrack. And we'll talk about all these goodies in a moment. But you know what also is surprising about this film? How current it is. Wow, this was a real eye-opener. They say history repeats itself, speaking of famous quotes. And while society has been forced to become a lot more civilized thanks to the invention of the atomic bomb, hello Oppenheimer, other awards contender this year, I think it's pretty clear that if that threat wasn't keeping people in check, we might be having another French Revolution right now. Because there have been so many uprisings throughout history. But now, I think technology has been a big helper. All right, because like you have to think, what is the difference? Why is this not happening as much today? In fact, I have to wonder if this was an intentional choice made by Ridley Scott to draw parallels to today, and screenwriter David Scarpa and the whole creative team. Because it's just incredible how out of control and violent the French were at this time. You're like, that's nuts. But you're like, we're so close to that today. I see that in what's I see shades of that in what's happening today. For instance, Napoleon is almost killed by a mob of politicians, just as Julius Caesar actually was. And like right now, that actually hasn't. Well, I mean, you saw somebody pull a gun on the Senate. I think it was the Senate floor on January 6th. And a number of people were killed during that riot. I didn't want to mention January 6th, but I mean, how can you not? When you watch this movie, you'll see. But also, just the other day, I think two congressmen, or at least one, threatened to get into a fight, wanted to fight the other one. And you're like, this is ridiculous. And then you look back in time and you're like, oh, it could be much worse. And I hope we're not headed to that same point. Now, it's important to note that historians have said that Scott and Scarpa play a little fast and loose with history there, and not everything actually happened. But I think close enough. And they're making such good points here that I'm okay with it, right? I mean, it's not school. But I think, I think it's compelling. I think in some ways it's better than school. All right, and we'll talk about that. Because I learned some stuff while watching this movie. No spoilers, but I'll tell you a few things that I learned. That was great. Now, I don't want to ruin, so on that note, I don't want to ruin any of the surprises for you, but if you're paying attention at all to current events, and I know a lot of you are, that will add an extra layer of holy cow to watching this movie, to see how, again, that there are shades of what's going on today in France in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Again, it really underscores history repeats itself. Oh, yikes. Speaking of history, I have a little sidebar here about one of the most fascinating things that I learned, but I had to do a little research after I watched the movie. So while I was watching Napoleon, I spotted Father from Raised by Wolves. I was like, is that Father? Oh, he's so charismatic. He just pops no matter how small his role is. And it is indeed Abu Bakr Salim. And so I was so thrilled to see him. I was like, yeah, and he's playing one of Napoleon's generals. So I was like, did Napoleon really have a black general? So I looked it up after the movie and discovered that not only did he, but that general had a son, Alexander Dumas. Alexander freaking Dumas! The writer of The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo and some other stuff, but those two are the big ones. He was mixed race. That's huge! How has that not been common knowledge up until this point? I know a couple of you probably in Europe will be like, your school system sucks, Grace. Well, it does. What do you want from me? But I bet you that 80% of you at least will have learned that for the first time here. And that's horrible. Like on The Gilded Age season 2, I recently was informed that the lead engineer, well, you haven't gotten to this episode yet, so slight spoiler for The Gilded Age, but I don't think anybody's watching it. But anyway, I didn't know the lead engineer on the Brooklyn Bridge was actually a woman. And then also the History Channel a few years ago, I was watching a document. That's right, I was watching the History Channel, very good documentary on the beginning of America. And they said that the Marquis de Lafayette, a crucial military figure in the American Revolution from France, there was actually a lot of evidence that he was gay. So that history, schools, the media, Hollywood, look how long it's taken Bass Reeves to get his due. That they have hidden the true diversity of talent that has always existed in the world, I think is truly shameful. So even the Napoleon movie didn't go far enough, but at least they included that general, and that lit the spark, which allowed me to go on this little journey and learn this and share it with you. Okay, back to Napoleon, which is really a two-hander, Phoenix and Kirby. Now, Kirby was already a scene stealer on The Crown as Princess Margaret. So good on that show. Although it's weird to think that an actress in such a risque role like this, showing a lot of skin and several graphic sex scenes, would be about to join the MCU, as I've told you. Margot Robbie was in Wolf of Wall Street, of course, and she's done a lot of big blockbusters since then. But this goes further than the Margot Robbie role. It's hard to believe, but that to me was more like, as I said, quick. And this permeates the entire film and very much defines Vanessa Kirby's role. So, at least the role has depth, right? She's not just eye candy like Robbie was in The Wolf of Wall Street. Here, the movie makes it clear that sexuality and producing children, a little bit like the House of the Dragon commentary in season 1, was women's only real power until, well, extremely recently, too recently. And Kirby does an excellent job of showing a woman forced to play that game, but resenting every second of it. That makes her relationship with Napoleon fascinatingly complex. It's easy to see why he loves her, because we've seen that kind of obsession depicted so often. But to underscore how Josephine's only ability to wield power at that time was her ability to seduce Napoleon, that was her conquest. I love that parallel. His conquests versus hers on a much smaller scale, obviously. But that is a really refreshing perspective on not just women in that time period, but relationships. I thought that was really interesting. And again, the battle sequences are something else. Whew, they are not only very well filmed, massively thrilling. I was like, oh, these are so good. But even while I was watching them, I was like, I must see these again. And they are also educational in that they show off a couple of cool facts about battles at that time, which maybe a few of you are so into history you already know. But I learned this stuff. So, in Hollywood movies, they don't often go into this level of detail. Like, why does one scout have 2 horses? I was wondering that, and then the movie gave me the answer. And I was like, that's awesome. And I had no idea how far a cannonball could go. Napoleon was like, fire! And I was like, you ain't never gonna hit that. And then they overshot it and had to adjust. And I was like what? It went like 2 football fields. A cannon. Do you know the force you have to fire that with to be able to get it that far? And apparently also the tilt was a big factor. This stuff was really great. Plus, with today's advancements in technology for filmmaking, you can really keep up with the horses on the battlefield. I was like, let's get our gallop on. And then also back to cannonballs to show exactly what a cannonball can do to, well, you'll see it. You'll know it when you see it. They actually blew a couple of stuff up with a cannonball and it never disappointed. I was like, that's incredible. These battles have a realistic quality to them that if they were longer, might even draw comparison to Steven Spielberg's depiction of World War II in Saving Private Ryan. But Napoleon was not only a master tactician, but he also had a flair for the dramatic. So at sometimes in the movie, he seems, again, a bit like a Batman villain, and not just because the Joker is playing him. He's like, oh, I see you, Batman. Like, it was really crazy what he was doing to like Russia and Austria. You're like, wow. Now, as I said, I want to see Napoleon again so I can experience these battle sequences once more, heightened in addition to the visuals and what they're depicting by Martin Phipps' visceral score. I'm going to get the score for sure. And the production values. First off, it's always nice to be in Europe and especially France. Plus you have the ornate uniforms of the French military. Ooh la la! And the depiction of the French aristocracy, this was fascinating. From their fall during the French Revolution, that opening scene with the guillotine, mwah, it just was like, again, it leapt off the page and it had dignity, but also was so trashy at the same time. Kind of like France. I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry. I love France. It's one of my favorite places that I've ever been. All right, so anyway, and I went to Versailles, and I almost saw Marie. I didn't have enough time to look at all of it, but that was fascinating. When you walk in the back of Versailles, it's like you're in every movie you've ever seen about, let's talk about what we're going to do. And you're like, oh, this is fun. And then the aristocracy, though, after the French Revolution, you see them trying to claw their way back up to the top of society. And that is also very interesting. That's particularly evident in the evolution of Kirby's Josephine, a big part of her character as well. As early in the film, having just been released from several years in prison, she is trying her best to look vibrant and sexy, to snag a new husband, because that's the only way she can have any power in this time period. But Kirby, she's trying real hard, even though she was almost starved to death and all her hair was hacked off in prison. But she's going to do her best. And the costume designer, the hair and makeup team, and then Kirby and her performance, what they're able to say by working together seamlessly without the dialogue, just to say in terms of the look and the behavior, I mean, that is just, I think there's so much, I think, you know, Kirby's role is very shocking in that she's objectified by the movie to some degree a little bit on first glance. But then when you think about it, there's so much nuance and depth to it, you're like, that's a really good role, and she does a great job in it. Now, while this is the Phoenix Kirby show, a few other cast members do manage to stand out. Tahar Rahim, because he's the only one with a regionally correct accent. Matthew Needham is Napoleon's brother, stealing scenes here just like he did on House of the Dragon. And by the way, Abu Bakr Salim is also joining House of the Dragon for season 2. Hooray, huzzah! I think it was Mark Bonner, who has, I mean, I couldn't quite tell for sure, but he has a great scene, or this, you'll know the dude when you see him, when he has to tell Napoleon something Napoleon doesn't want to hear. I thought that was very well done and very funny. And then Rupert Everett, he shows up in the third act on the side of the British. And you know what? You know, at first you're like, is Rupert Everett really going to bring enough to the table for this stunt casting? And then you're like, oh, wow, he did. What a delight. I will admit, though, that the only real problem with the film, in my opinion, because everything else you're like, it's trashy fun, let it go. But the pacing is a bit off. The movie starts out very strong, but then spends a little bit too much time on Napoleon and Josephine's relationship, taking too long to get back to the battle sequences. I would have interspersed those a bit more throughout the film, although I guess, you know, history. But I would be like, you need to throw a battle a little bit earlier in here, you know, to keep people engaged who are, you know, I mean, I don't know. It's like, I guess it depends why you're seeing the movie. I just thought the pacing was off. And I'm sorry to say, and my prime evidence of this is that as much as I was enjoying the film, at the top of the third act, I nodded off for a little bit. I mean, I saw like 95% of the movie, but you know, I took some long blinks. Although when you see this movie, you'll understand how funny that is. I don't want to give any of the jokes away. But don't go and see this movie unless you're well rested. Like if you have tickets to see this on Thanksgiving and you just had a bunch of turkey, good luck. You're probably going to have to see it again to see what you missed. So yeah, you could almost say that this is a little bit like Baz Luhrmann's take on Napoleon, just no singing. But I, for one, appreciate Ridley Scott taking some risks here and trying to modernize this history lesson. I also like the way they wrote stuff on the screen, like it was like writing at that time with a quill pen, and it's like cool handwritten, and you hear the scratches on the parchment, and it's gold ink, and I was like, that's real nice. And because, you know, it's modern, but it still comes across as a painting come to life, which is incredibly cool, especially if you like history. So if you think that there's a chance you might like Napoleon, you will. I mean, you will like it. It delivers. And it's worth seeing on the big screen, especially a premium screen, because of all that artistic flair. Which means you better hurry, because as I said, Beyonce's taken all the premium screens just 1 week later. Yoink! So that's my review of Napoleon, hitting theaters for Thanksgiving weekend, and then eventually headed to Apple TV. Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.